Ground rules. What are they? Does your team need them? And how do you set them and maintain them? That's what we'll look at in this video. Let's start with what are ground rules. Ground rules are the set of behaviours that we expect team members to conform with. Ground rules create a code of conduct for our team. They set out the behaviours that we expect everyone to follow. Ideally, a team will create its own set of ground rules. It is far more likely to respect them than a set of ground rules imposed by a project manager. However, there are some contexts in which certain ground rules are going to be necessary, and you may have to impose certain ground rules upon your team. Examples include things like health and safety, or in certain circumstances, elements of respect if there is a history of disrespectful behaviour. But even when you know that certain ground rules have to be respected, for example, security, if you ask the team to set their own ground rules, usually they will set perfectly appropriate ground rules. They know what's going on, and if you trust them, they will usually repay that trust. So my preferred approach is to let your team set its own ground rules, but to do your own thinking in advance so that you can fill in any gaps if they miss anything that you consider to be important. We'll look at the process in a moment. But first, why do we have ground rules? Well, it's because they set out expectations. They make people feel comfortable knowing what's expected of them and how they need to behave, and they get rid of sources of ambiguity. And of course, if you need to, with a set of ground rules, you can enforce behaviours in a way that you can't if people can quite easily say, I didn't know what was expected of me. However, if the team is familiar with one another, they've worked together before, or if they sit within an organisation with a strong shared organisational culture, then there's a good chance you won't even need to set ground rules because they will be implicit in the norms of behaviour that people already accept. In the context of project management, the team's ground rules are likely to sit within a wider document like a team charter. Team charter will of course include ground rules, but it will also include other things. Things like shared values, the processes we use for things like making decisions or sorting out conflicts, the tools that people use for specific jobs within the project, and the levels of authority that individuals have while doing their jobs. So how do we set ground rules? Well, here's the basic process that I would use. It starts with thinking through, from your point of view, what you would consider to be non-negotiable for your organisation, for your client, if that's different, and for yourself as the team leader. For me, I'm likely to include things like integrity, honesty, ethical standards, respect and fairness. Next, you need to facilitate a team conversation around ground rules. To kick off, explain what they are and why you think they're important, and the process you're going to follow. Then it's a good idea to ask your team to think about past work environments where they have valued the environment and environments that they didn't feel have worked very well, and to draw lessons from that thinking to suggest potential ground rules. Collate all of the ground rules that the team suggests and, if necessary, add your own. Next, ask your team to remove duplicates or to cluster them and come up with ground rules that summarise a set of ideas, to put them in some form of sequence, which might be a priority order or a logical order, and to tidy up some of the language. That last bit, the tidying up of the language, might happen after the team event. You might trust one individual to do that, as long as everyone's comfortable that that individual won't take liberties with the intent behind the ground rules that are expressed in the group. Once everyone agrees to the ground rules, adopt them formally and post them where people can see them. Put them on your intranet, on your project collaboration system. Put them on posters on the walls. And then, crucially, revisit them at team meetings. Maybe not at every team meeting, but regularly review how is the team performing against ground rules, are we seeing slips in standards, and crucially, are the ground rules still the right set of ground rules for us? Are there things we missed? Are there changes we want to make to the list? If there are, pick the right time and facilitate a new conversation to adapt the ground rules to the new context. So, what are ground rules likely to cover? Well, there are a number of things you might consider including. Some of the most important are things like timekeeping and respect for other people's time. And if you have a multinational team, possibly even how we work across time zones. Things like inclusion, tolerance and respect, how we work together as a diverse team. And then there's accountability and responsibility, both the team responsibility for what we're all doing together and individual responsibility for the component that's been allocated to me. An important one is fairness, what that means to the team and how we expect people to behave. And then there's contribution. Ground rules often set out what we expect of each individual in terms of their contribution and what we expect of the team in terms of listening to each person's contribution. You may also want to include the social aspects of the team and how the team gets on together. And critically, if appropriate, ground rules should always include a mention of confidentiality and security. Once you have ground rules, sticking to them is important. And as the project manager, and therefore as the project leader and the team leader, enforcing the ground rules is ultimately down to you. But don't worry. If you have a strong team, it will usually enforce its own ground rules. People will call out bad behaviours and corrections will happen. But if they do not happen, it is down to you. If you learn of an infraction or if you observe an infraction, you need to act swiftly and appropriately. Appropriately means a proportionate response. But if you get unacceptable behaviour and you cannot correct it, you do need to consider removing the individual from the team. Now that's extreme, but it does sometimes happen. Remember, ground rules are all about protecting the team from rogue team members because it is the team that gets the project done. But with a good team and a good set of ground rules and a great team culture, it is unlikely that you will ever need to do more than formally refer to the ground rules again, because once people know what you expect of them and what they expect of one another, they will typically comply. Please do give a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this video. I'll be making loads more great project management content for you, so please do subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of it, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.